Hey kids, welcome to lesson 2. Hope you're doing well. We're soon gonna talk about connecting to other sockets. So we have a socket, but we want to connect to something else. And to start doing that, we're gonna have to talk about a concept called IP. IP, which stands for Internet Protocol. Internet Protocol. All right. This is going to be a bit of the exposition dump for this course. But hopefully I'll try to keep it a bit short and, oversimplified for you guys. So you've probably seen it before. It looks something like this, like 5.24.125.8. Something like this. You've probably seen this before. I wouldn't be surprised. So this here is called IPv4. IPv4. And it's being rapidly replaced with IPv6. However, IPv4 is still very much in use, and it's in general a more simple concept, I think. And it's the one I'm most comfortable with. So that's what we're gonna go with. So IPv4 is specified as 4 bytes, right? You can see that kind of here. None of the numbers can ever be bigger than 255. So an IPv4 address is composed of 4 bytes, all right? Which usually can either be expressed as their 4 bytes just alone, or it can be as 2 words. So we have an upper and a lower word retaining these 2 bytes, or as just one big integer. You know, sometimes it's nice to use either one or the other. So that's an IP address. We're gonna talk about 3 different types of IP addresses because they're actually used for more than just one thing. Is for a billion million things, and you can go read the specification if you want, but I'm just gonna grab the 3 important ways that we care about. First of all, we have the internet layer. Internet, which seems like it should be quite encompassing, right? Because it's called Internet Protocol, like what more could it possibly be? But stick with me here. So on the internet, there's this huge mangle. Internet. In here, there's this huge mangle of nodes and wires and blah, 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 connecting all over the world. It's a super complicated system. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to treat it as a magic box. What we care about is in this internet, or rather to this internet, are connected a bunch of routers. So you're probably going to have one at home. And then, at FutureGames, you probably even have a couple of routers doing different things and so on. So to the internet, we have connected a bunch of routers. And each of these routers will be assigned its own unique IP address. So here we might have 5.2.15.2. I'm just making some up. 100.52.184.99. Yeah, and 5.84.86.2. Yeah, sure. So each of these routers are assigned their own specific IP address. So from one router, they can specify an IP address of another router and successfully get a path there through the internet. So with the internet, we are connecting routers together through this very complicated network that we call the internet. So that's the internet layer. Then we have the local network layer. Local network. And a local network is where you have one router at home connected to several devices. Either through, Wi-Fi or wiring or anything like that. So we have probably a PC, PC, and then you probably have your phone connected to it through Wi-Fi, and maybe you have a smart TV or something with internet access. And in this case, the router would have specified an IP prefix, so something like let's just 192.168.1.something, right? So the router is going to be set up to have this specific prefix for its local network. And then this question mark is the one that will be assigned to each specific device. So maybe the computer will get something like 192.168.1.25, and your phone will get a specific IP address, 192.168.1.150, and your TV. I don't know why coming up with random numbers is so hard. All right. So here we have a local network. So that each device in the local network can be referenced uniquely within that local network. So this PC can very comfortably get to its TV by just specifying its local address, beginning with this 192.168.1 prefix. All right, so there we have a local network. And then I'm going to talk about localhost, which is just the last one. Localhost is a bit special. So localhost, you've probably seen this before. It's just a special address. 127.0.0.1. So that's just a special address that refers to yourself. So if you have a PC here and it's trying to connect to localhost or 127.0.0.1, it will simply just connect to itself. So that's a very special address that's sometimes good to know about. Whoops. Spoilers. So here we have the 3 layers of IP usage. We have the internet, which is routers given a unique IP. We have the local network, where every device in its system is given a unique IP with a specific prefix. And then we have the local host, where you're just referring to yourself. Also, I should mention this local address here is by no means standard to be this. It could be anything. Here at home, it's 192.168.1. And it's generally the default at least in Sweden. I don't know if that's in the rest of the world, but if you look, for example, at your computers in FutureGames, they might very well be something a bit more complicated. It might be just the first 2 bytes that is the prefix, and then the last 2 bytes are the unique part of the IP. It's really how you set up your networking system. Okay, 3 layers, very good. Here's an example. Here's our example setup. We have the internet, and to the internet we have 2 routers connected, given their own IP, and on each of these 2 routers we have 2 computers. Very well, very small internet, but you know, they're connected. So I'm gonna say I want this computer here, this 152 computer here. I want to connect to this computer. It has a nice chat room, and I want to talk in the chat room. So how do I get there? Well, let's try then connecting to its IP here, 192.168.1.10. So I will just simply send a connection request to that IP. What will happen? First of all, the router will see this prefix that I'm trying to connect to, 192.168.1, and determine, okay, you're trying to connect to a local networked computer, or device rather. And wouldn't you know it, here is one with that IP, with a 10 at the end here. So it will simply connect you to that computer. Great. I didn't want to get there. I want to get here. So thanks, router. You're blocking my way. And even then, even if there wasn't a computer by this name, 110, it would still recognize the prefix and not even try to enter the internet. It will just assume that you're trying to connect to a locally connected computer on your local network. So clearly using our local IP won't work here. So, I mean, what other choice do we have? I guess we'll connect to the router IP. Yeah, let's try that. So we're gonna connect to this 54.21.5.10 IP, all right? Connection goes out, and the router will see that, okay, this looks fucking weird, so I'm just gonna ask the internet to see if it can find the way to this specified IP, this 54.21.5.10 IP. And the internet will do its thing, and the magic happens in here, and it goes around and around all over the place, and then eventually comes out the other end, and hooray, we found a router. Fantastic. So now we made a connection to this router from our PC. Fantastic. But that's not what we wanted, right? We wanted to get to this computer. We don't want to talk to the router. Like, that doesn't have anything good for us. There's no chat room on there. So, great. So we have a problem. How do we reference this specific computer? And the way we solve this in IPv4, I won't speak for IPv6, is that we specify something called ports. Ports. And you might have already seen that something seemed to be missing from this IP address here. Like, there's 4 numbers, but there's usually a 5th, right? Like, what happened to that? And that is the port. So if we type out something again, so 54.21.5.10 colon, and let's say 52001. That's not a valid one. It's 2021. Yeah, sure. That's the year. So at the end here, we have a port, and this is 2 bytes. 2 bytes. So just a word, and it's generally written as a word representation of 2 bytes. You don't usually see the 2 bytes written out like in the IP. So an internet packet, along with its IP, we will also send a port. Okay, so what is the port used for? Well, in our case here, a port is used in the router. So the router will have a list of ports. And each port is like, here's a huge list of different ports. And then if we add 2021 to this list, we should actually mark it as which computer should be receiving this network message that has port 221. So let's go into our router and we configure the router that this PC, this 192.168.1.10 computer, they should be receiving every network message that comes in at port 221. So I'll just write 221 to this network connection here between the router and the computer. So what will happen now? So if we, I'm just gonna leave that on actually. If we, from our computer, 152, connect to this address here, this address port pair of 54.21.5.10, which is the router, and then 2021 as the port. Well, the same thing will happen again. It will go through our router and say like, okay, that needs to go through the internet. And comes out the other side, goes into the router, but now the router will look up in its routing table and see that, okay, you're trying to connect to port 2021. Fantastic. Well, I have an entry for 2021. It goes to this computer. So then the message will be forwarded to that computer. And now we have a connection between these 2 computers. So that is what the port is. The port is actually not part of the IP in any way. A port is just additional data that we use to get inside of local networks to reach specific computers that are not actually exposed fully to the internet and given its own IP. So that's what ports are used for. Very nice. And of course, you can open up as many ports as you want. Maybe you have also 2022. Whoops, that's a 322, and that points to the same computer. Maybe you have port 5 pointing to that computer. Maybe you're running like a web server or something, and you want to run it on this computer, and so on. And this is called port forwarding, usually. Port forwarding. And you might have, ran into this when you're trying to, at least back in the day, I don't think it's used that much, it's not used much anymore. But back in the day, when you were trying to run like a VC3 server or playing Counter-Strike or something, and you wanted to host a server, immediately would run into problems where you try to Google, and it's like, oh, you have to open up these ports, and it's like, what the hell does that mean? And eventually you might have found out you have to go into some cryptic address to go into your router and find some table or something. That's what you were doing. Since you were hosting a server on your PC, other PCs needs to come in through your local network to your PC. And to do that, you have to open up a port on your router, finishing this path from the internet to your computer. Great. Ports also play another minor role when it comes to applications, or I would say operating systems, because on a computer, you will have, hundreds of sockets being created and destroyed all the time. You have your web browser, and you have maybe you have Discord or something, and maybe you're running like a web server and so on, and all of these different sockets are happening. So then let's say from the internet here, a message comes in saying hey, I want to connect to you. But then it's okay, but which socket do you want to connect to? I'm running quite a few. You have to pick one. And ports are then also used so that we can refer to a specific socket, right? So we will provide a port for each of these sockets. So this might be socket 5 and socket 6 and maybe 100. And we were connecting to 2021, so we'll just assign the socket that we want to receive the connection to. Let's use 2021. So then when the message comes in saying hey, I'm connecting to you port 2021, then the computer will know, or the operating system will know that, okay, this is the socket that you want to connect to. And then you can make a connection to a specific socket from another computer. So sockets and ports are also very important so that a computer can run multiple sockets without them, clashing with each other's data. Data can come in and reach a specific socket instead of just going to, I don't know, some random one or something. So you can see from the setup, if you're gonna be port forwarding a port, it's quite important that you actually match up the port you're forwarding with the application you're writing, so that you don't forward 4, but then you're actually creating the socket with port 2021. Because then, okay, all the data on port 4 is going to come in, but you won't have a socket open for it. So you'll be back to square one, essentially. So that's IP and that's ports. So now we have a basic level understanding of what those things are and what they're for, and hopefully a general idea of the different levels of computer networks as it retains the IPs, at least. All right, so that was a exposition dump. I'll see you next lesson where we're gonna start connecting stuff. So stay tuned.